Hey everyone, I'm Kasey Husen and I am your host for Spirecast today. And I'm excited to be joined by Spire's president, Rick Rusaw. Welcome, Rick. It's
Thanks,
great to
Casey.
see you. In this brand new year, I'm excited to hear, Rick, what are you most excited about when it comes to Spire this year?
Well, there's a lot of good things going on. I mean, clearly, we just came out of a tough thing with the conference. For those of you who were there, I'm assuming you've made it home and you're not still stuck in Orlando.
It
But
took a while.
Yeah, it was ugly. I hated to see that. One of the things that we're wanting to do while we're on that issue of the hurricane is this Monday. The board's meeting Monday morning to finalize a hurricane relief kind of package. Spire itself lost 300,000 at the conference
Wow,
because so much stuff gets spent ahead of time, and
right.
then we had to pay for things we actually did consume while we were at the conference and all the setup and stuff that occurred. And the hotel was working with us on some of that. But, unfortunately, because we're not a Florida organization, we weren't eligible for any of the relief that comes from FEMA
Wow.
or anybody like that for our conference. But I'm grateful for donors who've stepped in and helped us. Diane and I personally helped make a gift to that. We want to help ministers and ministry leaders. So on Monday, we're going to announce what a relief package to give discounts and things like that to help offset maybe some of the loss that people experienced from last year. But really excited about one, how the conference is shaping up. We have some top golf events coming up. But as you know, one of the things we really care about at Spire is pastor health and resiliency. And there's some new
Mm,
tools we're partnering with a bunch of other orgs on that are really geared at ministry leaders. How do we help our
good.
teams at our churches? How do we encourage those who are serving maybe by themselves, maybe are bivocational? And so the launch of some of those tools coming out later this year, I think, are going to be really a great thing. So looking forward to that.
That is exciting. And as you know, with Spirecast, we're always looking to help church leaders thrive in ministry. And today, since we're in a brand new year, we thought we would talk about goal setting. It's the beginning of a new year. We know leaders set goals. In fact, with resolutions being so popular, we see roughly 40% of Americans will set resolutions, and a whopping 88% of them will not be fulfilled. And why do you think this is the case?
Well, I think there's a couple of things around that. First of all, did you see the ball drop? I know I'm in Colorado and you're on the West Coast. So, did you do the cheater version and actually watch it on East Coast time?
You know what? I This is one of the first years I didn't watch it at all. So I have no clue what that looked like.
Well, do you know why they dropped that ball? Do you know what the tradition is around that?
Just the countdown?
Yeah, so the ball that drops in Times
Yeah.
Square. The reason they
Uh-huh.
do that is to remind you how you dropped the ball all last year. So, the reality is
That's good.
all of us all of us start out setting things up, right? we
Right.
we 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 have things we'd like to see different, but the reality is it's about change, right? We want something to change in our lives. we
Right.
we want to add something or delete something. We want to get better
Mm,
at something, or we want to stop doing something. And
right.
intentions are terrific, but intentions need something actionable behind them. And there's an old Chinese proverb that says, if we keep heading in the same direction, we're likely to get where we're headed. And so my
Yeah.
question always for all of us, and the first one I ask in the mirror is, do I like where I'm headed right now? Or do I like
Mm,
where this will take me? And if I don't, then why am I on this path? What needs to change?
right.
Hence, we all start with, we're going to make a plan. We're going to have some things we want to do different. But, I read something from Michael Hyatt years ago. It said the reason we don't uh, follow through on resolutions is, one, we don't have a plan. Two, we procrastinate. Three, we don't have
Mm,
enough discipline to actually stick with something. And fourth, and I think it's the biggest deal, is we often end up doing it alone. We don't
yeah.
really do it with others. So there's no real accountability in that for us.
Right. Right. What would you suggest to the leader who has identified one of those things being true of them when they've set their goals? What's one thing they could do differently this year?
Yeah, I think it's to try to be intentional and realistic. Sometimes
Mm,
we set something that is, and I'm for big goals, right? I always loved when our church dreamed big, and I
yeah.
love leaning into big things. But sometimes we actually set something that isn't doable, or we don't have enough horsepower, energy, personal drive to make it. The rule about change, right, is it's the old adage: we don't change when we see the light, we change when we feel the heat. And change
Mm,
management that happens for most of us happens when there's a pain point of some sort.
yeah,
If
yeah,
we don't change until the pain of staying like we are is greater than the pain that's coming with change. And so
right.
the reason resolutions don't often work for us is because we make a general kind of statement, but then we don't really put any intentionality behind that. Howard Hendricks had a great quote I heard years and years ago. He said, "I never met a person who planned on having a mediocre life, but I've met plenty of mediocre people." Um,
Oh, yeah,
we
that's good.
don't start with our ministry is going to be average, or we're
Right.
going to be okay parent, or we're going to be a mediocre spouse. We actually start with ambition and drive and ideas, and we start the new year with that.
Yeah,
And then life happens and our
right.
schedules happen, and all of a sudden it's February and we didn't actually start on anything yet.
Yep, that's a great segue to a question I wanted to ask you. I'll actually, an observation as I was thinking about us talking about goal setting today. It's funny, we're almost through the first week of a brand new year. One of the goals that I set personally for in the health related category was to just take more steps each day. I
Mhm.
want to make sure that I'm taking more steps each day. Funny enough, I live in California. It never rains here. You guys know this because you make fun of us most of the year. It rained the entire first week of the year here, which is a total blessing, but it threw off, one of my many goals that I have this year. So I didn't get the steps in that I had planned for. So my question, assuming many other people are in this position too, is how would you encourage leaders to keep being proactive when life just doesn't go as planned?
Yeah, so if you're in ministry, which I often tell people outside of ministry, that one of the resiliency issues is that it's an ill-defined job, right? It's
Mm,
there's always something for us to do. You never go home at night and say, "Well, you know what? There's no more needs to be met. There's no more people to be served. There's no
right.
more issues to take care of." There's always something. And the truth is, if we're not careful as leaders, we get caught in a reactionary mode. So we're reacting to
Mm,
whatever the thing is at that moment. And I think there was a principle I learned a long time ago called the principle of the critical few, which
mm,
simply said this: mastery is the art of purposeful imitation. So there's some things
mm.
I can't. There's a lot of things I want to do, but I need to start picking and choosing what things are really going to get my effort, what's going to get
Yeah,
my attention, what's going to get the best of me.
right.
Because if I don't give the best of me in an intentional way, then a lot of things get the best of me, right? All of
Yeah.
a sudden, I'm just responding to a crisis, or I'm responding to someone's perceived crisis. I remember, I remember early on, I probably would have been maybe my first or second year at LifeBridge, and if someone called me and they were having got to see a, and it's a Saturday and it's a marriage thing, and I'd go up to church and meet him, or I'd meet him at Starbucks. I would sit down and talk to him. And then one time, someone called me on a Friday night at like 10 o'clock and said, "My marriage is in trouble. I'm in crisis." And I said to them, "Hey, I'd be happy to meet with you, but how long has this been going on?" And they said, "Well, probably like 9 months for us." And I said, "Well, how about if we meet on Monday then? Would Monday or
Yeah.
Tuesday work for you?" Because what happens is people hit a point of bump, right? And all of a sudden they're driving in on us. And so
Yeah.
so take the people side out of it. It's anything. There are a lot of things that just push for our time. And
Right.
and I used to teach a bunch of time management classes, and um, time management talks about what are you saying yes to? Are
Mm,
you getting better at saying yes? Um, and I mean, actually, the whole flip was, what are you saying no to? And
yeah.
I flipped it to, what are you saying yes to? Because every time I said yes, I said a dozen no's.
Yeah.
Um, if I said
Yeah.
yes to doing an event this afternoon, I said no to my family. I said no
Right.
to things I needed to get done in my office. I said no to what was already on my calendar. So it's not how do I say no better, it's how do I actually learn to say yes better. So what is it you're saying yes to?
Mm.
What are the things that you're saying, hey, in my life, what matters now are these things? Am I saying a yes in those things?
That's really, really good. Is it enough to set goals alone, or do you think that they should exist in a larger framework?
I've been a huge fan of thinking about things in the larger context,
Mhm.
both when we think organizationally and when we think personally. Um, yeah, I've done an exercise. I've been doing it. I don't. So Casey, I don't want to tell you how long I've been doing it, but it's been a really long, long time now. That I call PGA, and it has nothing to do with golf.
Okay.
And it's really asking this question. It starts with, what do you want to be?
Mm,
What's purpose for you? So if the P is purpose, what do you want to be? And so
mm,
how would you answer that question? You might say, I want to be a better communicator. I want to be a better parent. I want to be a better spouse. I want to be a better leader. There could be 100 things we want to say that.
right.
Um, and they're really kind of ethereal. They're fuzzy. They're not well defined. They give context for direction, but no real specific thing to that. And you may have
Right.
a whole bunch of stuff on your list. When I go back and look at the ones I did 20 years ago, um, some of those things that I thought I wanted to be really ended up not being things that ultimately mattered to me, right?
Yeah.
So, what do you want to be? And then the G in the PGA is goals. Um, Goals then give me an opportunity to give definition to that. So let's say that if I go back to when my kids were in middle school, I go back to those years, and maybe that year I said I wanted to be a better parent,
Mhm.
and one of the things that I would end up doing then is have this general resolution. I want to lose weight. I
Right.
want to pray more. I want to read the Bible. But if I don't have a specific thing I'm choosing to do, so one of the things I did was I wanted to set a time with our kids that I would spend an hour with them, or I want to be a better spouse. Diane and I are going to do a date night once
Yeah.
a week, and we're going to shoot for Thursdays. We're going to keep our calendar clear on that. Um, so let's say 6 months from now, if I got asked the question, "Am I a better parent?" I'm
Mm,
not sure how I would answer that question, right? Depends on who
right.
you ask, actually, or I'm a better
Right.
spouse. But could I say yes or no? Did I go out to dinner or a movie, or did Diane and I take a hike on Thursdays once a week? Did we do that once a week the last 12 weeks? I could
Right.
answer yes or no to that, right? So what
Yep.
goals do is they give me an intentional action. So we all know all the school stuff about goals. Goals have a definite beginning point, they have a definite ending point, and they have some signposts along the way.
Mhm.
And so goals then sit under purposes. What do I want to
Mm,
be? What do I have to do to become that? And then the A is activity.
mm,
What am I actually doing? Um, Am I doing what I said I wanted to do to be what I wanted to be? And it's really a very simple formula. It's hard to do. It's hard to implement. It takes some time for us to work through it. I spend a day every year where I get away by myself and I create another PGA plan for
mm.
this next year for me. Um,
Yeah.
and it's purposes. What do I want to be? Goals. What am I doing? What's intentional, what's specific, and then my activity. Most
Mm,
of us manage our lives and we start at the wrong end of the stick. We start at the activity side.
mhm.
So
Right.
anytime I feel like my time's getting away from me or I'm overwhelmed with something, I go through and I start tossing stuff off my calendar, right? I
Right.
start clearing things. Okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to do this. And so we start at the activity. I remember when I was teaching the time management stuff, we would teach people how to do list all the things you're doing, and then let's put priorities by them, A's and B's and C's, and let's
Mhm.
get even more detailed and put A1s and A2s and A3s. And what I found out when I managed my life that way, it was like cleaning out my garage or a closet in my house. 2
Right.
weeks later, it was full of junk again.
Yeah.
Felt great for a week, but then it was full
Right.
of stuff again. When I learned this PGA methodology and when we brought it into the life of the organizations I've been a part of, It was, what do we want to be? And those are
Yeah.
hard questions. I mean, I think it's easy to give some flippant answers, but what do we really want to be? Um,
Right.
at LifeBridge, that was kind of driving us. We wanted to be a church that helped people who didn't go to church to come to church. We wanted to be a church that wasn't the best church in the community, but the best church for the community. And it led to a lot of intentional things we did around that.
Yeah.
So those are hard. I think you ought to ask your friends, when you're doing it personally. I think as an org, you want to bring in your team. What do we value?
Hmm.
And then what are we going to do to become that?
Yeah.
Purposes
That's
sit
so
at
good.
goals, and goals sit in judgment of activity.
I've listened to quite a few podcasts over the last week just about goal setting. I mean, it's the time to talk about it, right? I love your framework here because I haven't really heard too many people talking about something that calls us a little bit higher than just looking at this year and its activities, but looking at purpose, which I think spans far beyond the year that you're setting these goals and you're planning activity for. So that's really really helpful, and I can already see some of the things that are on my list. I put together a whole thing, and I like to think that they attach to the things I value most in my life. But we're busy. I've got two young kids,
Yeah,
and
it's
so
crazy time for you. So
I deal with a lot of complexity day to day, and also just kind of type A personality. I like to cross those things off my list. So this is really good. I would like to go back through that now and say, does this really help me
yeah.
become who I want to be?
Here's where I land on that one. Here's where it helped me, is I figured out early on that if I'm not doing what I said I wanted to do to be what I
Mm,
wanted to be, how come? Either I hadn't built in enough time for that, or the reality was I didn't actually want to be that. Um,
mm,
so if I said I wanted to be a better spouse, but I wasn't doing what I said I wanted to do to become that, the reality was maybe I didn't actually want to be a better spouse.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
and so it really builds for me what it did for me. I can just tell you what it did for me over the years.
Yeah. Please.
It just built in accountability. I remember in college doing my first one. So I was a senior in college when I did my first one, and I remember some of the stuff on there, were just crazy dreams, right? I hope that I, get to be this someday or do this sometime. And
Right.
now that I look back over these years, I'm amazed at how many of those things actually turned into something. Um, and
Mm,
and I think it was because there was this path toward intentionality. It wasn't that everything worked like I wanted to. It wasn't that I actually followed through on every goal I said. It wasn't that my activity always aligned. But I found out that if I lived more in the space of who I wanted to be, or what I wanted our church to be, um, it it forced me to pick and choose, um, off of kind of better and best, really.
right. Right.
Yeah.
When you talk about accountability, what's some advice you could give to people about what accountability could look like with their goals as they set
Yeah.
these things? They're more successful if they're doing it with others.
Yeah, and I think so on a personal level, who are the people in your life that you're comfortable sharing? Hey, here's some of the things that here's my PGA, for example.
Yeah.
I had for years I had two friends that I just would go through that with them, and here's what I said. Dinah and I would talk about it as it related to our home. And again, it's not that we did everything we wanted to do or that we were the
Right.
greatest parents on the planet, because I have kids who would tell you the opposite of that. But the reality is, when there's two powers in this. One is writing it down. I think when you write something down, it matters. And the second is expose it to somebody else,
Mm,
because just even in the simple act of doing it, you're acknowledging that you're setting yourself up to succeed or fail in somebody else's perspective.
yeah,
Um, and of all the things, I think writing it down and then having some place of accountability,
that's good.
that someone's checking with you. And what I love is if you have a close friend who will just share theirs with you too, and now you're kind of
Right,
mutually holding each other to something. I
right.
also think it's helpful to build in some calendar checkpoints. So I put on my calendar a half a day, um, once a quarter. just for me to get away and say, okay, here's the stuff I said I was going to do. Am I actually doing it? And then I go back and look at my calendar. Did I actually do, because days get away from us. I mean, it's,
Right.
this week I was in Orlando on Wednesday and Atlanta yesterday. And I got home late last night and I'm like, man, I lost some days this week. So
Yeah. Yeah, you travel a lot. It's funny, we actually got a question from someone when we posed this idea of talking about goals, and they said the biggest difficulty that they find in goal setting comes in setting specific time windows for reviewing their progress on this. And since you've kind of already worked through that, and put a place on your calendar through the year, how long do you wait to start reviewing? Am I becoming the person that I want to become? Am I nailing these goals? Am I on
yeah.
track?
So if you go back to the actual actionable part, right, the goal itself that you're setting, so it has some beginning, it has an ending, it has some signposts. So whatever those signposts you built in, if you said every week, then I would think at the end of a month you ought to say, hey, did I do that these last 4 weeks?
Yeah.
Um, I think it's really healthy to have an every 60 or 90 day just personal where you block an hour or two on your calendar just to go back and look and say, all right, these are the things I said mattered. Are they showing up? Am I doing these things?
Right.
So the more review, the better. It's like anything else.
Yeah.
And the less review, then I allow myself to, because here's what happens. I'm going to take more steps. Sounds great. So the real question is how come? So there's something you want to be that's causing you to say, I want to take more steps. So if you
Mhm.
thought out the to be thing, what does that really mean? And you may
Right.
have 10 goals under one to be statement.
Right.
Uh, and so am I well, it rained for a week and then school started back up and now I'm back at work.
Mhm.
And then we're on vacation and all of a sudden it's, March or it's April
Right.
and you're going, and then all of a sudden the way we often deal with stuff is, out of sight, out of mind.
Mhm.
And again, while I might have valued it, I didn't value it enough to actually do it. Right.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah, well, I'm chasing a toddler around the house still, so
you want to get all the
I'm
steps
still
in that you want.
able to get my steps in, yeah.
Yeah.
We made it work. No, that's really good advice, and, another person had posed, just a thought about wanting to have more meaningful contact with those in their community, um, who are not yet connected to their church, and it was related to life stage. They were saying it was easier when my kids were,
Right.
in college and we were, participating in different activities like sports, arts, all of that, but now not having that, what would be some of your advice about getting more connected with their community?
Yeah, one of the things that, of course, for me, I always cared about the church showing up outside, and that starts when
Yeah,
we go up outside, and then we move to neighboring, and so I would start with my neighbors. We
yeah,
used to get 4 practices for neighboring, right? Stay, pray, play, say. So get
that's
connected.
good.
Do you know your neighbors' names? Do you know anything about them?
Right.
And then we would say pray for your neighbor, not necessarily for them to become a Christian, but because you're a Christian, pray for your neighbor. So if I'm just already proactively doing that, Diane and I just moved from a home we'd been in for 27, 28 years to a new neighborhood. Now it's not far from where we live, but it's a whole new set of neighbors, and
Yeah,
and I'm catching myself going, I got to be intentional about this again, right? So we're
yeah,
trying to get to know, pray, play, right? Have them over for dinner, do a barbecue, stand out. I had a simple rule was if someone was outside, I didn't go inside. Um,
mm,
and so if I'm driving home and one of my neighbors was out doing something, I would walk over and have a
that's
conversation.
good.
Now, I'll admit there's some times I drove around the block a few times hoping they don't. Um, but and then say because eventually you're going to get a chance to tell your story. And so I
Yeah,
think the neighboring things hold true for all of us, right? So in my own community, who are the people that I'd like to connect with? I remember when we first started getting involved in the public schools. I remember calling several of the principals asking if we could have lunch, the school
yeah,
superintendent. And so that was a proactive way for me. So maybe a goal this year is I'm going to meet 5 of our community leaders, or there's 3 organizations that I want to be better, get better connected to, or I'm going to be a better neighbor somehow,
yeah,
and do some intentionality around that.
yeah. And I know people like me put so much pressure on the start of the year, or, I'll start on Monday. I'm sure you would encourage them just get started. It's not too late, even
There's
though we're
every
into
day,
January.
when's the best day to plant a tree?
Plant a
40
tree.
years ago. When's the
Yeah,
second best day today?
yeah,
So,
that's good.
yeah,
That's
I mean, we started the whole New Year's resolutions around, this goes all the way back to 153 BC when
mm,
January, Janus, the Roman god, was Janus that we started, and it was a two-faced god, one looking forward, one looking backward. That's how we get January 1. So
wow,
we've been doing resolutions since 153
a long
BC,
time.
most of us
Wow.
unsuccessfully. So,
Yes, well, thanks to you. Hopefully, many leaders who are listening and watching are going to be more successful at completing those. So, thank you for sharing those tips with us. Any closing thoughts, Rick? You could go anywhere with this.
I just love. We've come out of everybody's been saying this for a long time, but we've come out of a tough season, and we're in what I would call a collective unsettledness. And
Hmm.
I think there's. I mean, my heart for those who are on the front lines of ministry. So all of you, Casey, who are still active, leading in a church. I I I I love that because there's so much opportunity in that, but there's also so much um, we're carrying the weight of that. Anytime there's a big national collective weight, a hurricane, a disaster, a loss, it hooks to our own personal stuff and it just makes it
Yeah.
heavier. So I would just want to encourage you. There's so much opportunity and things do look different and God's using you and can bless
Mhm.
you. And when you lean into what he's doing and when you lean into who you can be as a leader, I think God honors that and blesses that. And I don't know of a
Mhm.
better time for us to be doing ministry than today, as complicated as it is.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm surprised you were talking a little bit about just how many years you've been doing this kind of framework with PGA. I've now been in ministry for almost 15 years,
So
and yeah, so it's crazy, but I can now look back and say, wow, these are different times that we are
really
leading through. And so, thank you for you and others who are sharing with us, leaders, encouraging us all the time, and just giving us wisdom for how to navigate the coming year is really helpful. So, thank you for that. And we want to thank everyone who is watching or listening today for joining us. We've got a lot of exciting things coming up this year with Spire. So, stay connected with us to view what that is and obviously be part of it when you see it come across. Thanks again for joining us, guys. We'll see you next time.